Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm political scientist Michael Baranowski, an emeritus professor at Northern Kentucky University. My guest today is John Updike, founder and president of Open Primaries. He's an activist and strategist with 30 years of experience working in independent, alternative, and reform politics, and is one of the country's most visible and vocal advocates for electoral reform and political independence. John Updike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
So I thought we'd start in good political science way with defining our terms. Open primaries can refer to a couple of different things. I think one, it basically lets independents vote in an existing party primary, but
Right.
The other one sort of abolishes that party primary entirely and puts every candidate on a single ballot with the top two, sometimes the top four, advancing to the general election.
Right.
My sense of things is that open primaries feels that both of these approaches are better than sort of traditional closed party primaries, but that sort of top two approach is your preference. So is that, do everything's right there, or what's your take on that?
No, absolutely. Because the big difference is in ownership of the primaries. Are they owned by the parties? And then you have to negotiate the rules, or are they owned by the people? And
Right.
The top two, as you're saying, that's a different definition of what a primary is. It's not about selecting a party nominee. It's about selecting the candidates that go from, the semifinals to the finals.
Right.
And I think that is the real game changer. But we believe strongly that in many, many states, going from where we are to a totally nonpartisan system, you're not going to get there in one leap. So opening the existing primaries is a way to make independent voters more visible and more powerful, and new things then become possible.
Yeah. And it seems to me that one of the best arguments for open primaries is what I might call a fairness argument. I mean, taxpayers pay for these elections. And
Right.
so given that, everyone should be allowed to vote in them. I mean, everyone's eligible to vote, not just people who happen to be registered with one of those two major parties. And I think there's a lot to that. But then someone might say, well, okay, why not just stop subsidizing party elections with the public dollars, as opposed to forcing parties to allow non-members to have a say in choosing who represents the party?
I agree with the people who say, let the parties do their own private nominating process, just like any private organization does. Unions, civic groups, whatever. They have private elections. They don't ask the government to administer them because they're membership elections, right? And I agree. And then that raises the question of, okay, if we're not going to subsidize private elections, what is in the best interest of the public? Maybe we want to get rid of publicly administered primaries altogether. Maybe we want to go to a nonpartisan system. That's a healthy and important debate at the state level. But I don't think those two are incompatible. I think the parties do have First Amendment rights to conduct activities in their own interest and their own benefit. It's just not clear that we, the people, should be involved in those.
Yeah. And parties, of course, occupy this weird sort of space, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not exactly private organizations, but they're not public organizations. And so I feel like they don't really fit in exactly in a lot of ways that people might expect them to in this whole system.
Yeah. And, Mike, to be honest, one of the things that I feel most excited about, when I founded Open Primaries back in 2009, people looked at me like I was founding a UFO research organization. Like they looked at me like I'm a little nutty. This issue is now completely mainstream. And the thing that I'm very excited about is that it's not an issue that is siloed. It's not a policy fix. Yeah. It's a way to have a conversation about exactly what you're talking about. What are these parties? In some ways, they look like governmental organizations. In other ways, they look like private associations. And how does it impact on election administration? The conduct of the Federal Election Commission, which, by the way, is the only commission in Washington where you have an even number of commissioners.
Yeah.
Why is that? Okay. So like getting the open primaries question in there opens up a whole nother set of questions about what role should parties play in our democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can get us in the territory of you starting to think of parties as sort of this closed two-unit duopoly of
Right.
control over everything, and that's obviously not in the party's interest to want us to see them as this kind of two-person or two-group cartel, if you will, kind of
Yeah.
running things.
Cartel is the word. I like that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, so what we know about closed primaries is that the audience for them, the people actually voting them, a small number of people, right? And it's also kind of skewed. So if we open them up, the idea, at least in part, is that that brings more people in. But it seems to me what evidence we have is that that increase is at least somewhat modest. I mean, we're talking like 3 to 6 points, somewhere in there, depending, obviously. So, but let's say we're being optimistic about this. You can go from maybe, I don't know, a fifth or so of eligible voters to maybe a quarter participating in primaries, but still that's an awfully small and skewed sort of group. And so someone might say, well, wait a second, if
What's
the
the big
gain
deal
is
here?
that small,
Right.
then why should we kind of force this big change on everyone for such a modest gain in terms of participation?
Yeah, and they're right. They're 100% right. If you think about primary reform as flipping a switch on the wall, meaning change the rules and then this will happen, you'll be disappointed because people in open primary states, people don't vote in these primaries.
Yeah.
So what's the big deal? Well, here's how I think about that. One is that independent voters are unorganized. They're the biggest group of voters in the country, but they're not organized. And they've resisted traditional organizing approaches. They don't want to join a third party. They don't like parties. So I think for me, the opportunity is open up the primaries, and then you've got to go to ground. You've got to tell independents, you now have a new opportunity, not just to elect this person or that person, but to change the whole culture of politics in your state if you choose to take advantage of it. So we just ran a campaign out in New Mexico where they had the first open primary in the state's history just 6 weeks ago. And we did targeted advertising to independent voters that vote in general elections, but don't vote in primaries because they weren't allowed to. We got 11% of those independents to turn out in the first election. Now, that's minuscule, but that's 38,000 people. And part of what we're looking at is how do we turn that into 20%? And California now has 40% turnout in the primaries after 15 years of a nonpartisan system. But you're right. If you think about you can't flick a switch and then this changes. It's just an open environment in which you can do some new things.
Gotcha. So it's kind of a process, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that's often said about closed primaries is what ends up happening is we get a general election where voters have to choose between a Democrat who's too far left for many of them and a Republican who's too far right, because, of course, those are the people who the more extreme closed primary voters picked. But from my take on the research on open primaries is that, well, there's sometimes a modest moderating effect, but again, it doesn't seem to be huge. And so I'm wondering, do you see this as a problem to the argument for open primaries? Because it seems to me so much of it's based on this is a great solution for hyper-partisanship.
Right. Well, in some ways, see, if the whole framing that you just laid out is that here's what you get in a closed primary. Democrats too far left, Republicans too far right. But if you bring in the independents, it doesn't really change much. Well, I think that framing that the Democrats are too far left, Republicans are too far right, misses the actual dynamic. It's not that they're too far left or too far right. It's that they are using dog whistle politics to talk to about each of the parties and the candidates with them about 5% of the voters on each side that understand dog whistleism.
Yeah.
Like it's a separate language than ordinary people speak. I mean, literally, I was in Texas couple months ago. I live in Illinois. I live in Chicago. I'm on vacation in Texas, and I see this commercial for Republican primary voters. It might as well have been in Vulcan. It's like, it's a different language.
Yeah.
So part of what independents do is I don't think it's about moderation. Independents are as ideologically diverse as America, but they don't like dog whistles. They like to be spoken to as human beings. They like to be related to as complex people that are capable of holding liberal views on this issue and conservative views on this issue and libertarian ideas over here and being with Bernie over here. And so part of what you see, and you see this in California, you see this in Nebraska, where we've had the open nonpartisan system for 90 years now, is that after a while, you start getting candidates, liberals and conservatives alike, that start speaking a different language other than dog whistleism for the primaries. They start relating to a more complex electorate. And I think that's positive, because talk to any legislator, any policy person, the need for bringing together different viewpoints, labor, business, environment, ranching. Like, if you want to solve any problem, you need the capacity to have divergent viewpoints at the same table. And dog whistleism politics is basically saying, we don't care about that.
One of the problems that people sometimes raise, or potential problems about open primaries, is what they might call rating, right?
Yeah.
Democrats voting to nominate whoever the weakest Republican, and vice versa, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering, to what extent is that a real as opposed to a theoretical problem? And do you think that a top two system kind of addresses this problem, or might it actually in some ways kind of make it worse?
Well, one is, it's not a real problem. I mean, this has been going back to, what's his name? The radio host, the famous one, the conservative guy.
Rush Limbaugh.
Rush Limbaugh. He ran Operation Chaos in 2008. Get out there, conservatives, vote for Hillary Clinton, keep this thing going.
Yeah.
It'll hurt Obama. Nobody did it. The Democrats have tried similar things to, vote for this crazy MAGA person because that's a better general election thing for us. People aren't really that motivated by that mode of voting. And the party rating issue, it's not just that people don't do it. It actually covers over the fact that that's what gets incentivized in closed primaries. So we just did a poll in New York, blue New York, Democrat stronghold, blue city. It's real. It turns out that there are more people registered Democrat in New York City who identify as independents and Republicans than there are people that identify as Democrat.
Wow.
More.
Wow.
It's 42% are saying, oh, I'm not a Democrat. I just registered Democrat because it's the only election.
Yeah.
So actually, if you really look at it, when they say, oh, there could be shenanigans if you let people vote, you're going, no. I guarantee you, go to any closed primary state in the country, and you're going to find huge numbers of people registered in a party that don't believe in that party.
So throughout your career, you've been deeply involved, I think it's safe to say, with kind of third-party independent politics, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that when we look at a top two design, it almost invariably shuts third-party minor parties out because they almost never finish top two, right? I mean, it's an argument the Reason Foundation made against your the Florida amendment there. And so I'm wondering, how do you kind of square this, right? Someone who really believes in the importance of minor parties, as I do, end up sort of being in favor of a system that seems to kind of push independents, push third parties out of the general election picture. Or maybe is that a false dichotomy in some way? I don't know.
No, I mean, look, do you have an extra hour to talk about this? I do. I come out of the third party movement. I proudly worked on Lenora Fulani's campaign, Ross Perot's campaign, Mike Bloomberg, Ralph Nader. I've supported conservative independents, liberal independents, and all kinds of things. New parties, you're right. And I'll tell you why I support top two. Is that two reasons. One, the notion that the way to build traction and power for a third party, a minor party, is to be guaranteed a spot on the November election, but you don't get to participate in round one,
Right.
is completely upside down. If you're not part of round one, you're not a real candidate. So, in the old closed primary system in California, you'd have a closed Democratic primary, closed Republican primary, then a general election in which the Peace and Freedom, the Green, the Libertarian, they would all have their candidates on the ballot. And they would each get 1% of the vote. Every year, 1% of the vote. Now, part of that is because the election's already over. Because of gerrymandering, there's no real campaign going on. But part of that is that the primary is where the campaign gets defined. So now in California, independent candidates, third-party candidates, are part of the mix from the get-go. The second thing is that the third-party movement has to grow up. It has to realize that, the reason why voters are not flocking to third parties is not because of the electoral setup. They don't flock to them in closed systems, open systems, nonpartisan systems. Third parties are not inspiring the American people because they act like mini versions of the Democrats and Republicans. Like the Greens and Libertarians, they're so committed to ideological purity. They're so committed to a vote for us because of our stance on wind farms in Tibet, which everyone's like, who cares what your position is? You're never going to get any votes, so we don't care. I think the top two, and we've seen this a little bit, what it does is it creates opportunities for third parties and minor parties to put a foot into the mainstream. Imagine, and we've seen this a little bit, but not enough. If Mike, you're running for state assembly in California, which has a top two system, and you're running as an independent, and you've never run for office before, and you go out and you knock on doors and you raise money and you get 7% of the vote. You don't make it to the final two.
Right.
All right. So what do? Well, you go meet with the top two and you say, I got 7%. What are you going to do for me? What are you going to do for my voters? Right. How am I positioning it so that when I run again in 2 years or someone I'm working with runs in 2 years, we can get 15% of the vote and expand our leverage for a set of concerns and issues? The problem with the third party movement is they don't build. They run these symbolic campaigns in November designed to feel good about, like, we the Libertarians are carrying the torch for, okay. Does anyone take you seriously? Right. You have important ideas. Same thing for the Greens. Same thing for these ideological third parties. So I think top two is the best thing that could ever happen to third parties, but only if they change how they think and start recognizing that the American people are not buying what they're selling, despite huge dissatisfaction with the Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. It's kind of like people are sick in Coke and Pepsi, but you're not bringing an alternative to market that people are interested in. Right. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah. Well, let's stick with California because we've been talking about that state a lot. It seems to me in that state, that top two system they have kind of regularly produces same party general elections. The top two tend to be Democrats, right? So it seems to me that if you're a Republican in California, in a really a non-trivial number of general election races, there's nobody from your party that you can vote for. So in that sense, doesn't top two reduce meaningful choice for, say, California Republicans?
Well, again, I think it goes to what's your definition of choice. Okay. Is choice an abstraction, or is choice related to the ability to impact and change things? So in the old system, you always had a choice, although this is the dirty little secret. In the old system, Republicans wouldn't run candidates in the heavy blue districts. So instead of two candidates, you'd have one. So a lot of this argument doesn't look at the data, which shows that Democrats don't run in tough red districts and vice versa. Okay. But put yourself in the shoes of a conservative who lives in Oakland. Okay. So this is one of the Oakland, Berkeley area. You're a registered Republican. Ronald Reagan was your favorite governor. You thought Schwarzenegger was too liberal. Okay. Well, in In a closed system, there's a Democratic Party primary, and then there's no general election. Nobody even campaigns. It's just over. Those candidates go and campaign for other people because the Democrat's going to get 80% of the vote.
Right.
Okay. So you don't matter. No one cares. You're a cranky old conservative in a blue liberal hippie district. No one cares about your opinion. Under top two, you end up with a Democrat who's like a woke Democrat, and you end up with a Democrat that's a little bit more, I don't know, pro-business, maybe pro-charter schools, maybe interested in reducing zoning requirements, whatever. All of a sudden, a cranky conservative voter is a hot commodity.
Right.
Because not that they're going to vote for a token Republican, but for a Democrat that at least has an open ear to a set of concerns. Doesn't make them a conservative.
Yeah.
But it just makes you're no longer persona non grata. And we've seen this over and over. In fact, there's some fascinating research about that Christian Gross out of USC did that showed what happens in these super liberal districts or super conservative districts where candidates of the dominant party, they say, okay, if I get to the final two, how am I going to win? If it's Democrat on Democrat, which is likely, how am I going to distinguish myself from my opponent? And so here's what happens. And the research showed this, is that candidates, they don't do the familiar pivot, which is you run to your base in the primary and then you pivot in the general election. They pivot, the smart ones, from the day they announce their campaign. So they say, hi, I'm Joe Schmo. I'm running for state senate as a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat and I love the Democratic Party. But they start calling and knocking on doors and developing policy positions that will allow them to appeal to the independents and the Republicans in their districts, knowing that that's how you're going to win a general election, is to have more than a base.
Right.
And then think about this, Mike. You send people to Sacramento who have an electoral coalition that put them in office that is not monopolar. You've got people from the other party and independents backing you. Now, all of a sudden, you're not going to have a problem sponsoring a bill with someone from the other party. You're not going to have a problem doing a meeting with an ideological foe. You're not going to, all of a sudden, new things open up. And that's what we see in Sacramento. It doesn't get a lot of press coverage. But the levels of bipartisanship policy discussion is very, very common now. When 15 years ago, it was borderline illegal.
So it really sounds what you're talking about is the distinction between having a choice but no real ability to have an impact, as opposed to actually being able to impact policy. And of course, in the end, I would think what most people want is to have some sort of real world impact, as opposed to just saying, well, is there someone with an R or a D next to that I can choose? And so I think that's a really important point to emphasize, because choice for the sake of choice with no ability to have an impact, really, so what?
Yeah, it's fake.
Yeah.
It's fake. And I think that, I'll be the first one to say that open primaries is a step forward. It opens a door. It's not some end point. It's not some solution. It's getting the average American has no say. I mean, most of us live not in a two-party system. We live in a one-party place. About 15% of the country lives in areas where there's genuine competition between the two parties. Most of us don't live there. So given that, how do we maximize the ability of ordinary people to have a say? And in my mind, this is a step forward.
Yeah. Now, in 2020, Florida had this Amendment 3, and it would have created a top two primary system in that state. And it ended up getting 57% of the vote. Now, it needed 60%, right? But there was some interesting opposition to this. The League of Women Voters, the ACLU of Florida, the Florida Legislative Black Caucus all came out against it, saying that it would, one of them used the term, would bleach Black majority districts. And I'm wondering, now, these are some groups that oftentimes are very much in line with kind of what the general reform movement wants to do. But here there's a lot of opposition. I mean, what's your response to that concern from those groups?
Yeah. No, and Florida was heartbreaking because we got more votes than Trump and more votes than Biden, and we still lost. But it was very instructive because, first of all, the target audience of those flyers and those ads saying, this is going to hurt African Americans if you open up the system was not black voters. It's white liberal voters who say, oh, I don't want to be associated with something. So it was very effective at reducing our support from way over 60% to below 60%. So it was a very effective attack. It is complete garbage. If you look at the independent voters in New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, in Florida that are shut out, 50% of them are people of color. It's Hispanic, it's Asian, it's African American, particularly younger African American. The average independent voter, the parties think of them or relate to them as kind of these old, cranky white guys with tinfoil hats. Nothing could be further from the truth. There is a complexity and diversity of independents, racially, ideologically, geographically, that really, the problem is not that they're going to dilute African American districts. It's that these are voters that the parties don't control. They don't speak dog whistleism.
Yeah.
And they've spent all this money teaching people that language. And now you're saying there's all these voters that we have to talk to.
Yeah.
We just like to blow our whistle.
Right.
And so it's a completely ridiculous argument. And where we're having that fight right now is in New York City. Because New York City, we're having these public hearings appointed by the mayor, and you're getting to look at this issue. We're having all these independents come and testify. And the commissioners are saying, well, we've heard this is going to dilute the power of minority voters. And they're saying it to an African-American independent who's saying, I cannot vote. How are you telling me that letting me vote, a 23-year-old Hispanic citizen that, was born in Venezuela, and a younger African-American, or the numbers of Asian Americans that are independent is well over 45%, because a lot of them come from countries where joining the party is a real thing you don't want to do. And so we're not fighting that argument with statistics. We're fighting it with people. Right. We're fighting it with ordinary people of color saying, what do you mean? My right to vote is going to hurt the voting power of people of color? What are you, insane? Yeah.
I think some people to this point, we've been talking a lot about independents, independent voters. And I know some listeners at this point might say, well, wait a second now, isn't it the case that while a lot of people say they're independents, 30, 40%, what have you, depending on the survey, when you actually look at their behavior, they just want to call themselves independent, but they're functionally Democrats or Republicans, and the true number of independents is actually somewhere around 10%, maybe even a little bit less. I have a sense how you're going to respond to this, but I want to get your take on that argument.
Well, look, I think that the mistake there is only looking at one behavior. And I think political science and punditry is being extremely unscientific in how they continue to say, yeah, you can say you're an independent, but if you look at who you vote for, we can characterize you as a Democrat leaner or a Republican leaner. As if that one activity, who you vote for, is determinative of who you are. So let me give you some other criterion you should look at, which people are starting to. What are the social media networks of independents? What do they look like? Well, we now have data. They're not just all team blue and team red. Right. Independents they want friend networks, social networks, in which people have different ideas. What kind of media do they consume? Well, they're not MSNBC or MS Now junkies or Fox News junkies. They want to go around this and that. What is their position on the political toxicity and divisiveness of the process? They have a whole bunch of things to say about the culture of politics and the need for new political options and choices. But if all you do is look at who they vote for, which again, most people live in parts of the country where what choice do you have?
Yeah,
like there's not this menu on the ballot. I mean, we're talking about a dismal level of competition, Mike.
Yeah.
between the two parties. I mean, I was just on a call with a team up in Massachusetts that's working on a ballot referendum for 2026 to go to a nonpartisan system. And they were telling me that 70% of their legislature ran unopposed.
Wow.
This is the birthplace of, this is John Adams' state. We're talking 7 out of 10 have no competition. And so you're saying an independent, when presented with almost no choices, they tend to gravitate in one way or the other. That makes them not an independent. I don't agree. You're not looking at all the criteria.
Right. Now, another argument I hear all the time is that, well, if we open up primaries and we say anyone can say vote in a party's primary,
Right.
then the party label begins to mean a lot less potentially. And that label can be important because it's one of the few sort of easy to understand heuristics, if you will, kind of low information cost signals that an ordinary voter has about what a candidate stands for, what they're about, that kind of thing. And so the objection is, well, opening up primaries will make the party brand even muddier and actually end up with voters being potentially less informed as opposed to more informed about what candidates are all about. What's your take on that argument?
I think both parties are going through significant crises regarding their brand. I think there's real legitimate concerns in there, both from Democrats and Republicans, that look at their party and they're like, well, we used to have the capacity to frame kind of like a national narrative for what this party meant. And we don't have that anymore. And I think that's real. And I think there's a lot of factors. Open versus closed primaries is not one of those factors. It's Elon Musk can spend $10 billion influencing things. Part of what Donald Trump exposed was a certain brittleness of an establishment that was ready for a remake.
Yeah.
And I don't like Trump. I don't like what he's done, but I give kudos to his capacity to sense weakness.
Yeah.
People forget he went in and destroyed the Republican establishment. I think you're seeing some of that with the DSA.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, these sclerotic old Democrats have been sitting around complaining about the Republicans going back to Walter Mondale, and they never do anything. They don't really stand for anything. They're like Republicans light. So I get these arguments, but I think that if you're going to say our capacity to remake our party and have a cohesive message and a narrative, if what you need to do to accomplish that is to wall yourself off from the American people, which are increasingly independent, I don't think you're going to be successful. I actually think an open system like they've had in New Hampshire for decades actually helps candidates and parties, develop a stronger brand because it's a brand that's not been built in a lab.
Right.
And then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, but these are real issues. I think both parties are in deep, deep, deep crisis.
2024, maybe not a great year for electoral system reform measures on the ballot. I mean, by my count, I could be off a little bit, but I think there were 8 open primary related measures. There was even one to repeal Alaska's top 4 system. Yep. Now that failed, and there was an open primaries measure for DC that passed, but the other 6, I believe, all failed. And so when reforms, you say that open primaries says that voters lose kind of this big, at least in one election, at what point does that kind of voters were confused or we need to do a better job at messaging stop being a sufficient explanation? And maybe it's just, well, no, this isn't necessarily what they want.
Well, I could talk for an hour about 2024. So I'll give you some top lines. So one of the things that is true about political reform in general and open primaries in specifically is that voters evaluate it on multiple dimensions. Unlike, say, an issue like abortion or gun control, or where they just say, I'm for this or against it. When you put an open primaries referendum on the ballot, people ask 2 questions. Am I for this or against it? And who's behind it and what are their motivations?
Sure.
Because one of the things that voters, and I love this about the American people, I love this. When you say to them, we need to change the rules of the game, their antennas go up and they say, okay, I need to be really sure that this is not a scam. This is not a group of Democrats that are using the flag and change to just hurt the Republicans or vice versa. So I'm going to look at the issue. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to look at who's behind this. And if I see it's all one side or the other, I'm voting no, even though I support the policy. And that's what happened in 2024. These are broad strokes.
Sure.
There was almost no attention paid to developing the kind of eclectic left, center, right, Republican, Democrat, independent, weird bottom-up, top-down coalitions that people could look at and say, okay, this seems like a weird group of people. It might be good for our state. I'm gonna seriously consider voting this. All they saw was consultants and television ads. And they're like, I don't know who is behind this. I'm voting no. And even then, these campaigns were legendary in how poorly executed they were. And I had so many fights with consultants that were like, we don't need grassroots. We don't need a coalition. We're just going to do television ads. And voters do not respond to 30-second ads when it comes to changing the rules of the game. They might when it comes to, like, I don't know, raising the minimum wage or something, that they're like,
Yeah.
I'm against that or I'm for that. You want to change the rules of the game, you better come correct.
Yeah.
And coming correct means you got to do the work. You got to knock on the doors. You got to build trust. You got to build coalitions so people can trust the ballot measure. And so I think we come out of 2024 actually in a much stronger position because there is a recognition that if you're going to ask people to do this, you better invest in giving them something that they can trust.
Do you think that part of the problem is that, at least it seems to me, that so much of the reform movement writ large, not just open primaries, but campaign finance and other things as well, seems to be so very progressive left coded. And so to a lot of voters, they hear about political reform and they just automatically assume, well, this is some woke lefty sort of thing. Do you think there needs to be more and better outreach to people who are kind of centrist and even to the right on this? Or
Absolutely.
do you maybe disagree with my characterization? I don't know.
You're 100% right. I mean, the political reform world has been, and these are my colleagues, I love them and work with them, shockingly inattentive to the fact that they have been rounded up by the Democratic Party. And I mean, if you look at, Nancy Pelosi did H.R. 1, this big democracy bill.
Mhm.
And I look at this and I'm like, isn't it interesting? It's only made up of democracy actions, some of which I support, but that are going to benefit Democrats. Isn't that interesting? And so many groups went along with that because they just looked at the policy. They didn't look at exactly the dynamic you're talking about.
Yeah.
So at the open primaries movement, we don't just talk about that. We actively promote and recruit and amplify the voices of diverse Americans. We push back with funders, with philanthropists who say, oh, we want to open the primaries so that moderates in the middle are going to, and I'm like, they're not moderates. They're conservatives. They're liberals. They're socialists.
Right.
They're libertarians. They're Americans who have so many different opinions. If what you want is moderation, don't do this because that's not who the American people are. But it's a fight because, and this goes to the issue of trust, is that when you put a referendum on the ballot and you don't show people this is not a Democratic Party ploy, they're not going to vote for it.
Yeah.
If they don't see that, if they see it as Team Blue trying to hurt Team Red, they're going to no.
Well, and I wonder if part of it too, when you mentioned H.R. 1, and it was just, there was so much that was packed in there. And there were some things I thought were pretty good ideas, and there were some things I kind of rolled my eyes at. But this, I want to tie this into 2024 because in a number of cases, it seems like open primaries was kind of associated with or bundled with ranked choice voting. And RCV is very popular with a lot of folks, at least on the left. And I'm wondering if maybe that was a strategic error, bundling all this together, because if you're asking people to change the rules of the game, I think people might say, well, okay, there's this one thing, but to just shake up all of these things, wait a second. So I'm wondering if that was
totally
a problem.
No, that decision to bundle these reforms was made at the elite level by academics and philanthropists who were looking at this stuff through a lens of game theory, and average voters were like, well, no. If you want me to vote for ranked choice voting, put ranked choice voting in front of me. If you want me, these are not the same. Open primaries and ranked choice voting, you can like them, you can dislike them. They're not the same. They're about different things. And so I actually wrote a memo to the movement right after the 2024 losses, in which I said many things. One was, we need to create space between open primaries and ranked choice voting, because the more you put them together, the more it actually hurts both issues.
Some people might say, well, okay, this is a problem, and it's not a trivial problem, but they might say, well, it's kind of really more of a side effect, if you will, of our system, which is hyperpolarized. It's driven by this sort of nationalized media. We've got geographic sorting. We've got serious negative partisanship and just all of these things. And so primary rules might matter at the margin, but they're not really prime movers of things. And I'm wondering, what, if anything, you think that critique gets right, and maybe where it goes wrong?
Well, I think what it gets right is that we have to change the culture, and changing the rules does not change the culture. That it gets 100% right. And if you look at the levels of, as you just described it, toxicity, negative partisanship, all that, open primaries as a policy does not begin to be adequate enough to touching that or changing that. 100% right. And it creates the possibility of people that are interested in challenging that, in creating new cultures, to have a way in, to be in the room. Right now, they're not in the room, those people. The only people that are in the room are the people that want that toxic hyper partisanship, because it's what language they speak, whether they're left or right. So it goes back to my early, it's not a light switch. It doesn't, I spoke to Michael Steele. This is a great story. Michael Steele, back when he was chairman of the Republican Party of Maryland back in the early 90s, one of the things about this issue is the parties can open their own primaries whenever they want. They don't even need to change the law. The Supreme Court has given parties the right to do that. So the Republican Party of Maryland changed their rules at a state convention in 1990. And they informed the Secretary of State, if you're an unaffiliated voter, you can vote in the Republican primary. And they did this, and nobody did. No independents voted in the Republican primary. And so the next convention in 1992, they said this was a waste of time. We're going to close it. And I spoke to Michael Steele about this, and he goes, we were so stupid. We thought that we could just change the rules and not tell anybody. No, changing the rules is just this almost administrative thing you have to do so that you can then begin to involve voters that are not part of the inner circle. Yeah. And here's the other thing. And a lot of people, and the best in class on this is Chloe Akers in Tennessee. She's formed a group called Best of Tennessee. Because in Tennessee, they don't have partisan voter registration. So everybody is just a voter. They have 14% turnout in their primaries, 64% turnout in their general elections. And 94% of races are done after the primary at the state legislative and congressional level. Okay. So what Chloe is doing is saying, hey, it's not about getting independents to vote in primaries. They already have that right. It's about getting these general election voters to vote in the primaries. Yeah. The people that say, and this is very common, Mike, people say, yeah, the primary, that's for the hardcore people. Yeah. That's for the people that go to Comic-Con, okay? I just watch Star Wars when it airs, in the movie theaters. I'm a regular person. I vote in November. And there's this education process that she's going on saying, you want to have an influence on your roads, your schools, you got to vote in June. You can't wait till November. So she's demonstrated that you can increase turnout. So it's about ending the rules that exclude independents. That's step one. But then it's changing how the American people, including independents, think about voting in round one. And if you don't do that, the rule change doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think when we think about Democrats and Republicans, most people, we focus on the oftentimes very big, very clear differences between them. But whenever I was talking to my students about electoral reform or any kind of systematic reform, I, I pointed out that actually, no, there's a pretty strong bipartisan consensus within the parties because everyone sitting in some elective office has managed to succeed at the system that we have. So it may be dysfunctional for the country, but it's oftentimes really good for those individual office holders. That's why I called the two-party system a cartel at the beginning. It seems to me the strongest headwind actually comes from the parties themselves, the people in which have really very little interest in changing up a system that works for them. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
No, you're right. I mean, look, going back to Florida, I was, very active in that campaign, and we had to clear all kinds of hurdles just to get on the ballot. And the day that we got on the ballot, the day we were certified by the Secretary of State in the court that we were official, we were sued by the Democratic Party of Florida and the Republican Party of Florida. Same thing.
You must be doing something right then. Okay.
No, when we enacted open primaries in California in 2010, Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy, who hate each other, held a joint press conference and said this is terrible for democracy.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the few issues out there that does attract bipartisan opposition. It also attracts bipartisan support. A vast majority of rank and file Democrats and Republicans favor a level playing field. They say, if these are taxpayer funded, then everybody should be able to vote. Republicans think that. Democrats think that. So it is challenging because you can't approach open primaries as a blue versus red or red versus blue. It's ordinary people against incumbents of both parties and people. And a lot of their opposition is not highfalutin. It's not, I got elected in this system. I know how it works. My consultants know how to win this game for me. Why would I change the rules?
Yeah. And so, it seems to me when a lot of Americans hear Republicans and Democrats talking about this is bad for democracy, what they hear is this is bad for our cozy little setup that we have. And that just kind of drives the lack of trust in both of the parties, really.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
and
go ahead. Sorry.
And these, I think that, I think that there is a insufficient recognition at just how harmful the standard practices and procedures that have been perfected and are now being weaponized with just a level of algorithmic precision. But these techniques and approaches have billions of dollars behind them. They're very effective. These people know how to win elections, but they don't take any responsibility that the cost of winning is to drive the American people insane. And it's one reason why every week, and we did the math on this, Mike, every single week, 10,000 Americans who are registered to vote as Democrat or Republican walk down to the DMV or the post office and change to independent.
Wow.
That's not a mental thing. They actually changed their registration status because the mental health costs of the way of doing business is very, very under-discussed in our country. It drives people nuts.
Yeah. And of course, that is very depressing and disheartening. And I don't want to end on a depressing and disheartening note if we can avoid it. So, when you look forward, say 2026, 2028, those, the next few cycles, what, if anything, do you see that maybe gives you at least some cause for optimism?
Oh, to me, there's a lot of very positive things happening. One is there is a very decentralized, emergent, independent candidate space. We're attracting some serious people that 10 years ago, 20 years ago would have absolutely run as Democrats and Republicans. They would have seen as running as an independent as political suicide. And now people like Seth Bodnar, Navy SEAL, former head of the University of Missouri, he looks at it and he's like, I could run as a Democrat in Montana and I could run a perfect campaign. I get 35% of the vote. Yeah. If I run as an independent, I might not win, but at least I've got a shot to get my voice out there. Partisanship is driving quality people to say, there has to be a better way here on the candidate front. The other thing too, and I just can't, people accuse me of hype when I say this, and I'm going to really try to play this down. For years, my experience as an organizer is that when you spoke to independent voters, by and large, think of it like a rubber band. they were pulling away from the status quo. They didn't like it, and it was a movement away. My experience now is that they are like a rubber band. They're starting to say, I'm not going to go back into the two parties, but I just can't wipe my hands of this.
Yeah.
I've got to find a way as an independent to show up, to vote, to engage, to talk to candidates, to talk to my neighbors as an independent. So we do a spokesperson training program for independents every quarter. It sells out. It's free, but people sign up in a week. People want to be trained on how to be leaders. These are not people that want to run for office. They want to be leaders. We're packing hearings for bills for open primaries. And these are people, ordinary independent voters, and none of them say, give me talking points. Give me the company line. We just say, go tell your story of what it's like to not be able to vote. And they're like, got it. I'll take a day off work, drive to Annapolis, drive to Dover, drive to Harrisburg, drive to New York City, and I will speak my mind. And they're like the most passionate spokespeople you've ever met.
Yeah.
And me and my staff and I, we talk about this endlessly. We've got to catch up with the independent voters in this country because they are on the move. They're starting to say, if we don't do this, if we don't clean this mess up, who will? Yeah. The Democrats won't. All they care about is beating up the Republicans. The Republicans won't. All they care about is beating up the Democrats. Who's looking out for the country? And independents are, without any organization, without any bureaucracy, are starting to find ways to express that sentiment. That just warms my day every day.
Well, all right. On that positive note, we will close. John Updike, it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thanks, Mike. Great talking to you as well.
Thanks for listening to this Politics Guys interview. If you have a question or comment for us, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. If you're not already a supporter of the show, we hope you'll consider becoming one. Supporters get ad-free versions of everything we release, our full-length midweek episode instead of just a preview, and access to our Politics Guys Discord group. It's a fun place with a great bunch of people. You can support us on Patreon, where you can even sign up for a free trial. And if Patreon isn't your thing, or you're a current supporter and want to give us a little extra one-shot contribution, you can support us on PayPal and Venmo too. You'll find links to all our support options at politicsguys.com/support and in the show notes. If you'd like to get our full-length midweek episodes, but you're not in a position to financially support the podcast right now, just email me. I'm at mike@politicsguys.com, and I will be happy to get that set up for you. And whether you're a supporter or not, we'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever podcast app you use, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And finally, a very special thanks to our wonderful executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Marie Miller.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,